still remember the sound of my own heartbeat echoing through the empty arena. 3 in the morning, the squeak of my shoes against the polished hardwood, the rhythmic pounding of the ball, the hiss of the net when I hit nothing but the bottom. Most people were sleeping, dreaming about success. I was living it alone on the court where true greatness is born. The security guard who let me in that night shook his head when he saw me coming. Kobe, you just dropped 42 points yesterday. Take a break, man. His flashlight beam followed me as I walked toward the court, casting long shadows across the empty stands. He'd seen me before, night after night, year after year. Still, he didn't understand. Nobody did. The lights in the practice facility were just bright enough to see the rim clearly, half illumination. Like twilight, like the space between sleeping and waking where the mind is most vulnerable and most powerful. I started my ritual, 100 makes from each spot. Not attempts, makes. If I missed, the count started over. 2 hours in, sweat pooled beneath my feet, my muscles screaming for rest. That's when the real work began. What I'm about to share with you was never revealed in any interview, never captured in any documentary. This is the truth I discovered during those solitary hours when the only witness to my transformation was the unforgiving echo of the basketball against hardwood and the silent judgment of my own expectations. People think they know my story. They've seen the highlights, the championships, the Olympic medals. They've heard about the pre-dawn workouts, the relentless pursuit of perfection, the competitive fire that consumed everything in its path. They think they know what drove me. They don't. The truth about fear isn't what you think. For 20 years, people watched me perform under pressure, hitting game winners with defenders draped all over me, playing through injuries that would sideline others for weeks. Against Portland in the playoffs, broken finger. Against Boston in the finals, ankle barely holding together. Against Detroit, shoulder feeling like someone was driving a hot knife through it with every dribble. They called it the Mamba mentality. They thought I was fearless. They assumed I had somehow risen above the human condition, transcended the paralysis that strikes when everything is on the line. They were wrong. I wasn't fearless. I didn't conquer fear, overcome it. I discovered something about fear that changed everything. Something hiding in plain sight that most people never see because they're too busy trying to escape fear's shadow. A secret I found not during championship celebrations with confetti raining down, not during the gold medal ceremony with the national anthem playing, but during my darkest moment when my body betrayed me, when my career seemed finished, when fear wasn't just knocking at my door, it had moved in and taken over every room in my house. This revelation didn't come from victory. It came from complete defeat. From being stripped of everything I thought defined me. From facing the one thing I had spent my entire life outrunning. The knowledge that someday, no matter how hard I worked or how much I wanted it, the game I loved would be taken from me. And what I learned in that moment will change how you face every challenge for the rest of your life. Because the secret to dealing with fear isn't what anyone thinks it is. It's simpler, it's harder, and it was there the whole time, hiding behind our desperate attempts to be something we're not. Fearless. The 12th of April, 2013, I still feel the snap, not just in my Achilles tendon, but in my soul. One moment I was driving toward the basket against the Warriors' me body on autopilot after thousands of identical movements. The next, I felt like someone had kicked me from behind with steel-toed boots. I looked back, expecting to see the defender who had struck me. There was no one there, just my body, finally surrendering after pushing it beyond human limits for 17 NBA seasons. The crowd at Staples went silent. I could feel 40,000 eyes on me as I tried to adjust what had happened in my mind. The human body has 9 tendons that connect the calf muscles to the heel bone. Mine had just exploded like an overextended rubber band. I reached down and felt my heel, half expecting to find my Achilles rolled up like a window shade inside my calf. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Not after everything I had sacrificed. I Shot those free throws on a severed tendon. People called it toughness. It wasn't, it was denial, refusing to accept what my body was screaming at me. That perhaps for the first time in my life, wanting something badly enough wouldn't be enough. In the locker room, the team doctor didn't need an MRI to confirm what I already knew. His face said everything. Complete rupture, surgery, months of rehabilitation. At 34, with the miles I had on my body, many wondered if this was the end. The reporters didn't ask if I would come back, they asked if I could come back. The distinction wasn't lost on me. That night, lying in the hospital bed with my leg elevated, the parade of visitors finally gone, the fear found me. Not the manageable kind of fear you feel when taking a game-winning shot with the crowd, roaring the kind you can channel, use as fuel. This was existential fear. The kind that doesn't just visit, it moves in, sets up shop in your chest, makes it hard to breathe. The kind that whispers, you're done, you're broken, you're nothing without basketball. The kind that reminds you that everything you've built your identity around, your entire sense of self and purpose might be gone forever. The kind that makes you wonder if the world still has a place for you, if you can't put a ball through a hoop at an elite level. Most people never talk about this kind of fear. It's not dramatic or cinematic. It doesn't make for good sports documentaries or inspirational commercials. The fear that comes not from what might happen in the future, but from what has already happened. The fear that comes when the story you've been telling yourself about who you are, the narrative that's guided every decision you've made since childhood, suddenly doesn't make sense anymore. I remember staring at the ceiling of that hospital room, unable to sleep, watching the shadows from passing cars dance across the wall. The pain medication they'd given me dulled the physical agony, but did nothing for the mental anguish. That's when I realized something profound about fear that I had never understood before, despite facing pressure situations my entire life. 24 seconds on the shot clock, down by 1 in Game 7. That's not real fear. That's just excitement dressed up in fear's clothing. Real fear is lying in a hospital bed at 2 in the morning, wondering if your entire identity is about to be erased. Real fear is facing the possibility that the one thing you've poured your heart and soul into for as long as you can remember might be taken from you forever, and not knowing who you are without it. Most people think fear is the enemy. That fear is what holds you back from achieving your dreams. That to succeed at the highest level, you need to conquer fear, eliminate it, rise above it like some kind of emotional superhero. That the masters of any craft have somehow found a way to banish fear from their lives. For years, I believed that too. I built my entire approach to the Gamido life around the idea that fear was a weakness to be overcome through sheer force of will. 5 championship rings seemed to confirm that philosophy. I was wrong. Completely, fundamentally wrong. 3 days after surgery, the painkillers weren't working anymore. My leg throbbed with each heartbeat. The hospital room felt like a prison cell. The television on the wall played highlights of games continuing without me. The Lakers fighting for playoff position. The world spinning on its axis like I had never existed. I had visitors, of course, teammates, coaches, family, all with the same look in their eyes, that mixture of sympathy and uncertainty. Their words of encouragement hollow even to their own ears. You'll be back. If anyone can do it, you can. This is just another challenge. But beneath those platitudes, I could hear the unspoken question, what if this is it? That's when the fear was strongest. Not during the day when distractions were plentiful, but at night when the hospital quieted, when the nurses' visits became less frequent, when there was nothing to focus on but the ceiling and my thoughts that circled like vultures. What if I can't come back? What if I do come back, but I'm a shell of myself? What if everything I've worked for ends with a whimper instead of a roar? I tried what had always worked before, pushing the fear away, drowning it in determination, setting new goals, visualizing my triumphant return. But for the first time in my life, these tools felt useless, like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. The fear kept rising, no matter how hard I fought it. That third night, something broke in me. Not in a bad way, more like the breaking of a fever. I remember the exact moment. 3:37 in the morning, according to the digital clock on the nightstand. I had been fighting sleep because sleep brought nightmares of falling, of running on legs that wouldn't move. But exhaustion finally won. And in that space between wakefulness and dreaming, stripped of everything I thought defined Meath, uniform, the accolades, the identity I had spent decades building, I made a discovery that transformed my relationship with fear forever. I realized that trying to overcome fear is like trying to overcome your own shadow. The harder you run from it, the more faithfully it follows. The more you fight it, the stronger it becomes. The more energy you spend trying to silence it, the louder it gets. I had been treating fear like an opponent to defeat, when in reality, it was more like gravity, a fundamental force that can't be eliminated, only worked with. My breakthrough came in the form of a simple question. What if fear isn't the enemy? What if all these years I'd been fighting against the very thing designed to guide me? Like that moment in the game when you finally recognize your defender's patterns, not to eliminate them, but to use them to your advantage. What if fear wasn't a weakness to overcome, but a signal to interpret? Think about water for a moment. When water meets an obstacle, it doesn't try to break through with force. It doesn't treat and defeat. It doesn't spend energy being angry at the rock for being in its way. It simply flows around, finding the path of least resistance. Water doesn't overcome obstacles. It adapts to them, incorporates them into its journey, and ultimately shapes them through persistent, patient action. That night, I realized fear isn't a wall to break through. It's not something solid at all. It's a current to flow with. The more I resisted my fear of never playing again, the more paralyzing it became. The more I tried to fight the thoughts of failure, the more power I gave them. But when I finally allowed myself to feel the fear fully, to stop thrashing against its surface and instead dive into its depths, something unexpected happened. The fear didn't disappear. It didn't magically transform into confidence, but it did change form, like water changing from ice to liquid, same substance, different state, more useful, more adaptable, more powerful in its way. In those quiet hours, I began to see that fear isn't the opposite of courage. It's not even an obstacle to courage. Fear is the raw material from which courage is made. Just as pressure creates diamonds, fear, when embraced rather than avoided, when listened to rather than silenced, creates a kind of unstoppable determination that's different from mere ambition or drive. It's determination tempered by humility, strengthened by vulnerability, guided by wisdom. This wasn't about positive thinking or repeating empty affirmations in the mirror. I wasn't trying to convince myself everything would be okay. This was about something much more fundamental, understanding that fear isn't a sign of weakness or failure. It's not proof that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're at the edge of transformation. It's your body and mind telling you that you're in uncharted territory, and that's exactly where growth happens. The fear was telling me something important. Not give up, but pay attention. Not retreat, but proceed differently. Not you can't handle this, but this matters deeply to you. When I stopped fighting against that message and started listening to it, everything changed. Not externally, my situation was exactly the same, but internally, a shift had occurred that would alter not just my recovery, but my entire approach to challenges for the rest of my life. The real work began the next morning. Not the physical rehabilitation, though, that would be brutal enough, but the mental practice I developed to transform fear from an enemy into an ally. A practice born not from sports psychology books or motivational seminars, but from necessity, from the raw, unfiltered experience of facing my own mortality as an athlete. I remember the first physical therapy session. The therapista former military doctor who had worked with special forces, looked at me skeptically when I told him my timeline for return. "Kobe, this isn't like your other injuries. The human body has limits." I nodded, not arguing, but thinking. It's not my body I'm counting on. It's what I've discovered about fear. Let me take you through this practice step by step. Not as some abstract theory, but as the actual process I used every single day of my rehabilitation. A process that ultimately allowed me to return to the game, but more importantly, allowed me to return to myself stronger in the broken places. First, I started by mapping my fears, not just writing them down, but creating a detailed topography, like a general surveying the battlefield before engagement. Not just the obvious fear that I might never play basketball at an elite level again, but all the fears beneath it. Fear of irrelevance, fear of disappointing my family, fear of letting teammates down, fear of wasting the prime years I had left, fear of being remembered as someone who couldn't finish the journey, fear of having to redefine my entire identity. I wrote them all down, not to eliminate them, but to acknowledge them, to bring them from the shadows into the light where they could be examined. I learned that unnamed fears grow in the dark like mold, spreading their toxic influence to every corner of your mind. But once named, once acknowledged, they begin to lose their overwhelming power. This wasn't a one-time exercise. Every morning I would revisit this map, noting which fears had grown stronger overnight, which had receded, which new ones had emerged. Some days the fear of physical pain dominated. Other days it was the fear of public failure. By tracking these shifts, I began to see patterns show certain thoughts, triggered cascades of fear, how external events could suddenly amplify specific worries. Second, I stopped trying to be fearless. Instead, I practiced being intimate with my fear. Each morning during rehabilitation, I would set aside 20 minutes before doing anything else to sit with my fear. I would close my eyes and actually invite the fear in, not with resignation or defeat, but with curiosity, with respect. I would feel its weight, its texture, its temperature. Where did it sit in my body? In my chest, my stomach, my throat? Did it have a color, a shape, a sound? This wasn't some new age visualization exercise. This was practical reconnaissance. Know your enemy so thoroughly that it can no longer surprise you. Most people flinch away from fear the moment they feel it. They distract themselves, numb themselves, or push through it without understanding it. I learned to do the opposite, to turn toward the fear, to examine it with the same analytical precision I used to study game film. And here's what I discovered. Fear changes under observation. Like quantum particles behaving differently when measured, fear transforms when consciously experienced rather than unconsciously avoided. It doesn't disappear, that's not the goal, but it becomes something you can work with rather than something that works against you. Third, I developed what I call fear alchemy. For each fear I identified, I asked a series of questions. What is this fear trying to protect me from? What wisdom is hidden within it? What would this fear look like if it were an ally rather than an enemy? This wasn't about finding silver linings or engaging in toxic positivity. I wasn't trying to convince myself that my injury was actually a blessing or that everything happens for a reason. That kind of shallow thinking insults the depth of true fear. Instead, I was mining the fear itself for the precious resources buried in its depths. My fear of never playing again, it contained my deep love for the gamut of love I had sometimes lost sight of in the relentless pursuit of victory. My fear of letting people down, it contained my commitment to excellence and service values that would guide me long after my playing days ended. My fear of having to redefine my identity, it contained the seed of a broader vision for my life beyond basketball, a vision that had been waiting for space to emerge. Through this daily practice, fear began to transform from a monolithic enemy into a complex messenger. Not always a messenger I wanted to hear from, but one whose insights I couldn't afford to ignore. Fourth, I practiced taking one fear-guided action each day. This was perhaps the most counterintuitive part of the practice. Rather than acting in spite of fear or in defiance of fear, I began acting in direct response to fear. Not an action designed to eliminate the fear, but an action informed by the wisdom I had extracted from it. When my fear of physical weakness spoke loudest, instead of pushing harder in rehabilitation, my old response, I would spend extra time on mental visualization of movement patterns. When my fear of basketball mortality screamed in my ear, instead of denying it, I would spend an hour developing ideas for how I might impact the game beyond my playing career. When my fear of public failure grew overwhelming, I would deliberately share my struggles with someone I trusted, softening the sharp edges of my self-imposed perfectionism. These weren't grand dramatic actions, they were small daily choices guided by a new relationship with fear. Like a compass that doesn't tell you where to go but helps you maintain your orientation, fear became a tool for navigation rather than an obstacle to progress. The fifth step was the hardest but most transformative. I had to learn to measure my progress not by how little fear I felt, but by how much fear I could carry while still moving forward. The goal wasn't to become fearless. The goal was to become so intimate with fear that it no longer controlled my decisions. I developed a daily reflection practice, tracking not just physical rehabilitation milestones, but fear carrying capacity. Could I feel intense fear about my future and still be fully present during a physical therapy session? Could I acknowledge the legitimate possibility of failure and still give everything to my recovery? Could I carry the weight of uncertainty while maintaining the light touch needed for precise movement? This practice didn't make the rehabilitation any less painful. The physical agony of rebuilding atrophied muscle, retraining movement patterns, pushing against the body's natural protective mechanisms, all of that remained exactly as difficult as it was supposed to be. But something else changed. The suffering that comes from fighting against reality, from resisting what is that began to dissolve. I stopped wasting energy on the futile battle against fear itself. I stopped dividing my attention between the work of recovery and the work of pretending I wasn't afraid. All that energy, previously squandered on maintaining the illusion of fearlessness, could now be channeled directly into the task at hand. Think about what happens when you stop fighting against the current and start swimming with it. You don't necessarily reach your destination any faster, but you arrive with energy to spare. You don't experience any less of the water's force, but you transform that force from obstacle to vehicle. This practice didn't guarantee I would return to the player I once was. It didn't eliminate the very real possibility that my body might never fully recover. But it did something more important. It transformed fear from a barrier into a bridge to a deeper understanding of myself and what I was truly capable of. And with each day of this practice, I discovered something that no championship, no scoring title, no gold medal had ever taught me. That true strength isn't measured by how little fear you feel, but by how much fear you can carry while still taking the next step forward. 8 months later, I returned to the court. Not as the same player, my body had changed, and I had to adapt my game accordingly, but as a more complete human being. When I stepped back onto the hardwood for the first time since the injury, the fear was still there. The fear of re-injury, the fear of diminished capacity, the fear of failure in front of millions. But now, instead of trying to silence those fears, I acknowledged them. I felt their presence like old friends walking alongside me, not directing my path, but accompanying me on the journey. What happened next surprised even me. Playing with fear rather than against it gave me a different kind of edge, a clarity I had never experienced before. Because when you stop wasting energy fighting fear, you can direct that energy toward what truly matters, being present, making the next right move, focusing on what you can control. I scored just 9 points in that first game back, far from my career average. But each of those 9 points carried the weight of everything I had learned in those 8 months. They were points scored, not in spite of fear, but through it like water flowing through obstacles rather than smashing against them. The real victory wasn't returning to basketball. The real victory was returning to life with a relationship to fear that empowered rather than diminished me. That allowed me to be vulnerable and strong at the same time. That taught me that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but the presence of fear plus the willingness to move forward anyway. This is what I want you to understand about your own fears. You don't need to overcome them. You don't need to eliminate them. You need to listen to them, understand them, flow with them rather than against them. Your greatest achievements won't come from being fearless. They will come from being intimately acquainted with your fears. So intimate that you can extract their wisdom while not letting them dictate your actions. Remember, the water doesn't overcome the rock. It flows around it, through it, with it. Be like water with your fears. Not battling against them, but moving with them, through them, beyond them. This is the secret I discovered in that hospital room. Not how to be fearless, but how to be brave. Not how to eliminate fear, but how to transform it from your greatest enemy into your most powerful ally. Your fears are not obstacles to your greatness. Properly understood, they are the very path to it.